But Elijah Oliver never expected his to start in a room full of people who would later try to destroy it. The crystal chandeliers of the Grand Metropolitan Hotel cast dancing shadows across the marble floor as Chicago's elite mingled at the annual Children's Hope Foundation Gala. Elijah Oliver stood near the champagne fountain, his tailored Armani tuxedo fitting him like a second skin, but his mind was elsewhere. At 28, he was already heir apparent to the Oliver real estate empire, a billion-dollar dynasty his grandfather had built from nothing. Yet tonight, surrounded by the city's most powerful figures, he felt utterly empty. Another boring evening of fake smiles and business cards, he muttered to himself, swirling the golden liquid in his crystal glass. The familiar weight of expectation pressed down on his shoulders like an invisible crown, too heavy, too suffocating. His phone buzzed with the fifth text from his mother, Julia Oliver, reminding him to network appropriately and remember the family reputation. Julia ruled the Oliver family with an iron fist wrapped in designer gloves, and she had specific plans for Elijah's future, plans that didn't include him falling in love with anyone she hadn't personally vetted and approved. Across the ballroom, Rachel Oliver, his 26-year-old sister, held court with a group of socialites, her laughter as sharp as the diamonds adorning her neck. She caught Elijah's eye and raised her champagne flute in a mocking salute. Rachel had always resented that, as the eldest son, Elijah would inherit the lion's share of their father's empire. Their younger brother Thomas, 24 and bitter beyond his years, was probably somewhere in the hotel bar, drowning his jealousy in expensive whiskey. The Oliver family dynamics were toxic enough to poison a small city. But tonight, fate had different plans. That's when he saw her. Janice moved through the crowd like liquid grace, her black evening dress elegant but clearly not designer, her natural beauty needing no enhancement from the costly jewelry that adorned every other woman in the room. She was directing the catering staff with quiet efficiency, her warm brown eyes focused and professional, her smile genuine as she thanked each worker personally. Elijah found himself gravitating toward her corner of the ballroom, drawn by something he couldn't name. As he approached, he heard her gentle voice, encouraging a nervous young waiter who had nearly dropped a tray of hors d'oeuvres. "Don't worry, David," she said softly, steadying his hands. "Everyone gets nervous their first night. You're doing beautifully. Just breathe." The kindness in her voice stopped Elijah in his tracks. In his world, staff were invisible, treated as extensions of the furniture, yet here was this woman, clearly the event coordinator, treating each person like they mattered. "Excuse me," Elijah said, approaching with unusual hesitation. "I'm Elijah Oliver. I just wanted to say this is the most beautifully organized gala I've attended." Janice looked up, and when their eyes met, the world seemed to pause. Her smile was radiant, completely unguarded, and Elijah felt something shift inside his chest, something he'd never experienced in all his years of carefully orchestrated social interactions. "Thank you so much, Mr. Oliver," she replied, her voice carrying a musical quality that made his name sound different, warmer. "I'm Janice Williams. I've been coordinating events for 5 years, but I have to admit, this one meant something special to me. The Children's Foundation does incredible work." There was passion in her voice when she spoke about the charity, a fire in her eyes that had nothing to do with money or social status. Elijah realized he was staring and tried to compose himself, but something about her presence made his usual polished confidence crumble. "Would you—" he began, then stopped, suddenly feeling like a schoolboy asking for his first dance. "Would you like to step outside for some air? It's quite warm in here." Janice glanced around the ballroom, checking that everything was running smoothly. The evening was in full swing, her team handling their responsibilities with the efficiency she'd trained them for. She nodded, and together they walked toward the hotel's famous rooftop terrace. The Chicago skyline spread before them like a glittering tapestry, the October air crisp against their skin. For the first time in hours, Elijah could breathe freely, away from the suffocating expectations and watchful eyes of his family's social circle. "It's beautiful up here," Janice said, wrapping her arms around herself against the cool breeze. Without thinking, Elijah shrugged out of his tuxedo jacket and draped it around her shoulders. The gesture felt natural, protective, and when she looked up at him with surprise and gratitude, he felt something he'd never experienced before, the desire to take care of someone simply because they mattered to him. "Tell me about yourself, Janice Williams," he said, leaning against the terrace railing. "What do you do when you're not orchestrating perfect charity galas?" She laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "I paint in my spare time, though I'm probably terrible at it. I volunteer at the animal shelter on weekends. I love cooking, especially for people I care about. There's something magical about sharing a meal you've prepared with your own hands." Everything about her was genuine, unpolished by the artificiality that coated his world like expensive varnish. Elijah found himself sharing things he'd never told anyone. His dreams of making the family business more than just about profit, his love of architecture, his secret wish to design homes that families could actually afford. "Most people in your position don't think about affordable housing," Janice observed, studying his face in the moonlight. "Most people in my position don't think beyond their next acquisition," Elijah replied honestly. "But I've always believed that homes should be about love, not just investment portfolios." They talked until the gala ended, until the last guest had departed and Janice's team had finished their cleanup. Elijah had never felt time pass so quickly, had never felt so understood by another person. When he finally walked her to her modest Honda Civic, he felt like a different man than the one who had entered the hotel that evening. "Janice," he said, catching her hand gently as she reached for her car door. "I know this might sound crazy, but I feel like I've been waiting my whole life to meet you. Would you have dinner with me tomorrow night?" She looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his face, searching for something. Sincerity, perhaps, or some sign that this wasn't just another rich man's whim. "I'm not from your world, Elijah," she said softly. "I work 3 jobs to afford my apartment. I shop at thrift stores and clip coupons. Are you sure you want to complicate your life with someone like me?" Elijah stepped closer, still holding her hand, his voice intense with conviction. "Janice, my world is full of people who have everything and feel nothing. You have so little materially, yet you light up every room you enter. Yes, I want to complicate my life with someone like you. I want to complicate it beautifully." She was quiet for a long moment, then smiled, that same radiant, unguarded smile that had stopped his heart earlier. "Okay, Elijah Oliver. 1 dinner, but I choose the restaurant." As she drove away, Elijah stood in the empty parking garage, still wearing her warmth on his jacket, still feeling the electricity of her touch. He pulled out his phone and saw 17 missed calls from his mother, 12 from Rachel, and 8 from Thomas. The Oliver family had noticed his absence, and they would have questions. But for the first time in his life, Elijah didn't care about their questions, their expectations, or their carefully laid plans. He had met a woman who made him want to be better than the sum of his family's ambitions, and he was going to fight for that feeling with everything he had. What he didn't know, as he walked to his Bentley with a lightness in his step he'd never experienced before, was that his family was already watching. Julia Oliver's private investigator had photographed every moment of his conversation with Janice, and the war for Elijah's soul had already begun. The golden promise of love was about to face its first test against the silver poison of family manipulation, and only one would survive. Chapter 2. Against all odds. When love declares war against legacy, the battlefield is always the human heart, And Elijah Oliver was about to discover that some victories come at the cost of everything you thought you knew. The Oliver family mansion sat like a fortress on Lakeshore Drive, its limestone walls having witnessed 3 generations of wealth, power, and carefully orchestrated marriages. But this morning, those walls would witness something unprecedented: open rebellion from their heir apparent. Elijah descended the grand marble staircase with a lightness in his step that had been absent for years. 6 months had passed since that magical night at the charity gala. 6 months of secret dinners, stolen moments, and a love that grew stronger with each passing day. Hidden in his jacket pocket was his grandmother's engagement ring, a flawless 3-carat diamond that had sealed Oliver unions for generations. "You're glowing," Rachel observed acidly from the breakfast table, her perfectly manicured fingers wrapped around a crystal coffee cup. Must have been quite a business meeting last night. Elijah ignored his sister's sarcasm and took his usual seat. But everything felt different now. The mahogany dining table that had once felt regal now seemed cold and imposing. The oil paintings of stern-faced Oliver ancestors seemed to glare down at him with disapproval for the choice he was about to make. "Where's Mother?" he asked, checking his Rolex. Julia was never late for the family's daily briefing, their morning ritual of discussing business strategies and social obligations. "She's in Father's study, planning your engagement party to the Ashworth girl," Thomas replied, not looking up from his tablet. At 24, Thomas had perfected the art of delivering devastating news with casual indifference. Elijah's blood turned to ice. "What engagement?" Rachel's smile was razor-sharp. "Oh, didn't you know? Mother finalized the arrangement last night. You're to propose to Catherine Ashworth next month. It's perfect. 2 real estate empires joining forces. Father would have been so proud." The mention of their deceased father hit like a physical blow. Jonathan Oliver had died 2 years earlier, leaving behind a business empire and 3 children bound by his ironclad will, a document that gave Julia controlling interest until Elijah's 30th birthday, provided he married appropriately. Elijah stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the marble floor. "There will be no engagement to Catherine Ashworth." Julia Oliver entered the dining room at that moment, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her black Chanel suit immaculate. At 58, she commanded respect and fear in equal measure, having clawed her way from middle-class obscurity to become Chicago's most powerful socialite through her marriage to Jonathan. "Good morning, darling," she said, kissing Elijah's cheek with calculated affection. "I trust you slept well. You've been keeping such irregular hours lately." "Mother, we need to talk," Elijah said, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. Julia's pale blue eyes narrowed slightly. She had inherited her son's intelligence and her husband's ruthlessness, a combination that made her a formidable opponent. "Of course, dear. Children, give us privacy." Rachel and Thomas exchanged meaningful glances before departing, but Elijah knew they would be listening from the hallway. Privacy in the Oliver household was always an illusion. "I'm in love," Elijah announced without preamble. Julia's expression didn't change, but he saw her knuckles whiten as she gripped her coffee cup. "Love is a luxury we cannot afford, Elijah. You have responsibilities. I'm going to marry her. Her name is Janice Williams. She's an event coordinator. She volunteers at animal shelters, and she makes me feel alive in ways I never thought possible." The coffee cup shattered against the marble floor, sending porcelain shards skittering across the room like fallen stars. Julia's mask of composure finally cracked, revealing the venom beneath. "An event coordinator?" The words dripped with disgust. "Some common girl who serves canapés for a living? Absolutely not." Elijah pulled out the engagement ring, its faceted surface catching the morning light streaming through the tall windows. This was grandmother's ring. She wore it for 62 years of marriage to a man she chose herself, not one selected by committee. Your grandmother was already wealthy when she married your grandfather, Julia spat. This girl is after our money, Elijah. Can't you see that? Janice doesn't even know about the inheritance terms, Elijah replied calmly. She thinks I'm just a real estate developer with a nice apartment. She's never asked me for anything except my time and attention. Julia began pacing, her heels clicking against the floor like a countdown clock. I forbid this marriage. Marry Catherine Ashworth, secure the merger, and keep your little plaything as a mistress if you must. But you will not legitimize this relationship. Elijah had prepared for this moment, had rehearsed his words during countless sleepless nights. But standing in his family's ancestral home, surrounded by portraits of powerful men who had always chosen duty over desire, he felt the weight of generations pressing down on him. I choose Janice, he said quietly. I choose love over legacy. The slap came so fast he didn't see it coming. Julia's palm connected with his cheek, with enough force to turn his head, the sound echoing through the vast room like a gunshot. You ungrateful child, she hissed. Everything we've built, everything your father sacrificed for, and you're willing to throw it away for some gold-digging nobody? Elijah touched his stinging cheek, but his voice remained steady. If that's your final position, Mother, then you've made my decision easier. What does that mean? It means I'm proposing to Janice tonight, with or without your blessing. Julia's face went pale, then flushed with rage. If you marry that girl, you'll lose everything. The inheritance, the company, your place in this family. I'll see to it, personally. Then I guess I'll have to build something new, Elijah replied, heading toward the door. Something based on love instead of manipulation. Elijah! Julia's voice cracked like a whip. Walk out that door, and there's no coming back. He paused at the threshold, looking back at the woman who had raised him, but never truly loved him. Not the way Janice did, unconditionally, and without expectation. Goodbye, Mother. That evening, Elijah took Janice to Lincoln Park Zoo, the same place where they'd had their first official date 6 months earlier. She wore a simple blue dress that cost less than his tie, but she was more beautiful than any woman in designer gowns he'd ever known. They walked hand in hand past the lion exhibit, where she'd first told him about her dreams of opening an animal sanctuary someday. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, and Elijah felt like he was stepping into the first real day of his life. Janice, he said, stopping beside the pond where families of ducks glided peacefully through the water. 6 months ago, I was just existing, going through the motions of a life someone else had planned for me. Then I met you, and suddenly I understood what it meant to be truly alive. Janice's eyes filled with tears as he dropped to one knee, the engagement ring catching the dying light like captured starfire. I don't have much to offer you, except my heart and a promise that I'll spend every day trying to deserve your love. Janice Williams, will you marry me? The word yes was barely a whisper, but it was the most beautiful sound Elijah had ever heard. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, she pulled him up into a kiss that tasted like forever. It's gorgeous, she breathed, staring at the diamond in wonder. But Elijah, are you sure? I heard some of your family's friends talking at the gala about arranged marriages, about business mergers. Won't this cause problems? Elijah cupped her face in his hands, memorizing every detail. The way her eyes sparkled when she was happy, the small scar above her left eyebrow from a childhood accident, the dimple that appeared when she smiled. Let me worry about my family, he said. You just worry about planning the most beautiful wedding Chicago has ever seen. What neither of them noticed was the photographer hidden behind the trees, his telephoto lens capturing every moment of their proposal. By morning, the photos would be on Julia Oliver's desk, and the real war would begin. But for now, In this perfect moment beside a peaceful pond, Elijah Oliver held his future wife in his arms and felt richer than he'd ever imagined possible, even as his family's fortune slipped through his fingers like water through broken glass. Chapter 3. Perfect Storms. Heaven and hell can exist in the same moment. Elijah and Janice were about to discover that their paradise was being built on the very foundation their enemies planned to destroy. 3 months into their engagement, Elijah and Janice moved into their dream home, a stunning lakefront mansion in Lincoln Park that Elijah had purchased under both their names. The decision to make Janice a co-owner wasn't just romantic, it was revolutionary in a world where wealthy men rarely shared legal power with their wives-to-be. "I can't believe this is really ours," Janice whispered, standing in the marble foyer as afternoon sunlight streamed through the crystal chandelier, casting rainbow patterns across the cream-colored walls. Elijah wrapped his arms around her from behind, breathing in the jasmine scent of her hair. "Not just ours, my love, yours. Your name is on every document, every deed, every mortgage paper. This house belongs to you as much as it belongs to me." She turned in his arms, tears glistening in her eyes. "Why would you do that? Most men in your position would—" "Most men in my position don't love the way I love you," he interrupted, cupping her face tenderly. "This isn't just a house, Janice. It's our foundation, our future. I want you to feel secure, protected, cherished. I want you to know that no matter what happens, you'll always have a home." The house was magnificent. 6 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a gourmet kitchen that opened onto a great room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. But what made it truly special was how Janice transformed it from a showcase into a sanctuary. Within weeks, the sterile perfection gave way to warmth and personality. Janice hung her paintings, bold, vibrant canvases that captured Chicago's skyline in ways that made Elijah see his city through new eyes. She filled window boxes with herbs for cooking, installed reading nooks with soft cushions, and created a home office where she could run her growing event planning business. "You have magic in your hands," Elijah said one evening, watching her arrange fresh peonies in a crystal vase. "Everything you touch becomes more beautiful." Their nights were filled with intimate conversations that lasted until dawn. They cooked together, Janice teaching Elijah family recipes passed down from her grandmother while he shared stories of his travels around the world. They planned their wedding for the following spring, dreaming of a ceremony in their own backyard overlooking the lake. "I want to invite my whole family," Janice said one night as they lay entwined on their king-sized bed, her engagement ring catching moonlight from the windows. "My cousins from Alabama, my aunt from California. They've never seen anything like this house. Invite everyone," Elijah murmured against her neck. "I want to meet every person who helped shape the woman I love." They talked about children, at least 3, maybe 4. A boy with Elijah's green eyes and determination. A girl with Janice's artistic soul and infectious laugh. They designed a nursery in their minds, complete with hand-painted murals and a rocking chair by the window. "I never thought I could be this happy," Janice confessed, tracing patterns on Elijah's chest. "Sometimes I'm afraid I'll wake up and this will all be a dream." "It's not a dream," he promised, pulling her closer. "This is just the beginning of our forever." But while they built their paradise, storm clouds gathered in the shadows. Julia Oliver sat in her private study, surrounded by photographs and documents that would make a private investigator weep with pride. She had spent a fortune hiring the best surveillance team money could buy, and their work was thorough, invasive, and devastating. "Explain to me again why this is taking so long," she said coldly to the man sitting across from her mahogany desk. Richard Kane was Chicago's most expensive fixer, a man who specialized in making inconvenient problems disappear through legal manipulation and carefully orchestrated scandals. His services didn't come cheap, but Julia Oliver could afford anything. Mrs. Oliver, your son's fiancée is remarkably clean, Kane admitted, spreading photos across the desk. No criminal history, no suspicious financial activity, no compromising relationships. She volunteers at 3 different charities, pays her taxes on time, and hasn't even had a parking ticket in 5 years. Julia's perfectly manicured nails drummed against the desk surface. Everyone has secrets, Mr. Kane. Find them. We're still investigating, but I have to warn you, if we don't find genuine dirt, we'll have to manufacture it. That's considerably more expensive and carries certain risks. Money is no object, Julia replied without hesitation. My son is about to inherit a billion-dollar empire, and I will not allow some nobody to destroy everything we've built. Create whatever evidence you need. Meanwhile, Rachel and Thomas were conducting their own campaign of psychological warfare. They attended every social event in Chicago, spreading carefully worded poison about their brother's unfortunate infatuation with a woman far beneath his station. It's really quite sad, Rachel confided to Mrs. Pemberton at the country club, her voice dripping with false concern. Poor Elijah is completely besotted. Mother is beside herself with worry. I heard she's already moved into the family house, added another society matron, her eyes gleaming with gossip. Oh no, Rachel corrected with practiced sorrow. She convinced him to buy a new house and put her name on everything. The girl's much cleverer than she appears. These conversations happened at garden parties, charity luncheons, and exclusive dinner gatherings. Like ripples in a poisoned pond, the whispers spread through Chicago's high society, painting Janice as a calculating gold digger who had seduced and manipulated their beloved Elijah. Thomas took a different approach, focusing on their business associates and board members. During private meetings at gentlemen's clubs, he planted seeds of doubt about Elijah's judgment and leadership potential. The company needs stability, he would say, swirling his aged whiskey thoughtfully. But how can we trust someone who makes such poor personal decisions to make sound business choices? Unaware of the gathering storm, Elijah and Janice continued building their perfect life. Elijah surprised her with a private rooftop dinner on their 3-month anniversary, complete with a string quartet and her favorite white roses. Dance with me, he whispered, pulling her into his arms as the musicians played their wedding song. Under the stars, with the Chicago skyline twinkling around them like earthbound constellations, they swayed together in perfect harmony. Janice wore a simple black dress that Elijah had bought for her, not because she needed expensive clothes, but because he loved spoiling her with gifts that made her eyes light up. I have something for you, he said, producing a small velvet box. Elijah, the engagement ring is already more than— Shh, he interrupted gently. This is different. Inside the box was a delicate platinum bracelet adorned with tiny diamonds, arranged like stars. Each diamond represents a moment when you made me fall deeper in love with you, he explained, fastening it around her wrist. The first one is from the night we met. The last one is from this morning when you sang in the shower and didn't know I was listening. Janice's tears fell like liquid silver in the moonlight. I love you so much it scares me sometimes. I've never felt anything this powerful before. Good, Elijah said, kissing each tear from her cheeks. Because I plan to love you more every day for the rest of our lives. They made love that night with a passion that seemed to set the very air on fire, their bodies and souls intertwining as completely as their legal and financial lives had become. Afterward, they lay wrapped in silk sheets, planning their future with the confidence of people who believed love could conquer anything. I want to expand the business, Janice said, her head on Elijah's chest. Maybe open a second location, hire more staff. Your connections could help, but I want to earn every client through my own merit. Whatever you need, Elijah promised. But I love that you want to build something yourself. You inspire me to be better, to create something meaningful instead of just inheriting it." What they didn't know was that Julia's surveillance team had recorded every intimate moment, every private conversation, every tender gesture. Phone lines were tapped, emails were monitored, and their most sacred moments were being catalogued as ammunition for the war to come. The perfect storm was building strength, and soon it would unleash its fury on the paradise they had built together. But for now, in the sanctuary of their love and the safety of their shared home, Elijah and Janice Oliver-to-be held each other close and dreamed of a future that felt as certain as the sunrise. Neither could imagine that their greatest weapon, the house they owned together, would soon become the very tool that would either destroy their enemies or shatter their world completely. Chapter 4. Love's Sweet Symphony. True love isn't measured in diamonds and mansions, but in the sacred moments when two souls recognize they were created to complete each other, and Janice's 25th birthday would prove that some gifts can never be bought, only given from the heart. The morning of Janice's 25th birthday dawned crisp and clear, with Lake Michigan stretching endlessly beyond their bedroom windows like a canvas painted in shades of sapphire and silver. Elijah had been awake for hours, watching his sleeping fiancée, marveling at how peaceful she looked with her dark hair spread across the silk pillowcase like spilled midnight. 6 months of living together had only deepened his devotion to her. Every morning, he discovered something new to love. The way she hummed old gospel songs while making coffee, how she talked to their plants as if they were beloved pets, the adorable wrinkle that appeared between her eyebrows when she concentrated on her event-planning sketches. He had memorized every detail of her sleeping face, the long lashes that cast shadows on her cheeks, the slight curve of her lips that suggested she was dreaming of something pleasant, the way her breathing made the delicate chain of her necklace rise and fall. This was his favorite time of day, these quiet moments when he could love her without reservation, without the world intruding on their perfect bubble of happiness. "Happy birthday, my queen," he whispered, pressing gentle kisses along her jawline until she stirred. Janice opened her eyes slowly, a sleepy smile transforming her face into pure sunshine. Even first thing in the morning, without makeup or styled hair, she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. Her natural radiance came from within, from a soul so pure it seemed to glow. What time is it?" she asked, her voice husky with sleep. "Time for your birthday surprise," Elijah said, unable to contain his excitement. He had been planning this gift for months, transforming the unused sunroom into something that would make her artistic heart sing. Every detail had been carefully considered, every element chosen to reflect how deeply he understood her dreams. "Elijah Oliver, what have you done?" She laughed, allowing him to pull her from bed and wrap her in his silk robe. The garment dwarfed her petite frame, making her look younger and more vulnerable, awakening every protective instinct he possessed. "Close your eyes," he commanded, leading her down the hallway. "And no peeking." Janice squeezed her eyes shut, trusting him completely as he guided her through their home. This absolute trust she placed in him was one of the things that humbled him most about their relationship. She followed him blindly, her hand in his, knowing that he would never lead her anywhere that wasn't wonderful. She could smell something wonderful, fresh paint, new wood, and the faint aroma of her favorite vanilla candles. The anticipation was killing her, but she kept her eyes closed, knowing that whatever Elijah had planned would be worth the wait. "Okay," Elijah said, his voice thick with emotion. "Open them." The sunroom had been transformed into an artist's paradise. Floor-to-ceiling windows flooded the space with natural light, perfect for painting. A custom easel stood in the center, surrounded by professional-grade art supplies. tubes of oil paint in every color imaginable, brushes of every size and shape, canvases stretched and ready for her touch. But the real masterpiece was the walls themselves. Elijah had commissioned local artisans to install floating shelves and display areas where Janice could showcase her finished works. In the corner sat a comfortable reading chair with a cashmere throw, and beside it, a small table with a leather-bound journal and fountain pen. The attention to detail was breathtaking. He had remembered every offhand comment she had ever made about her artistic dreams, every frustrated sigh about not having proper workspace, every wistful glance at art supply store windows. This wasn't just a studio. It was a physical manifestation of how completely he saw and understood her. "Elijah," Janice's voice broke as tears streamed down her cheeks. I can't. How did you... You're always talking about not having enough space to paint, about working on the kitchen table and having to clean up your supplies every time we eat," he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "I wanted you to have a sanctuary, a place where your creativity could flow freely." She turned in his arms, her hands framing his face as if she were trying to memorize every detail. "No one has ever done anything like this for me, ever." The raw emotion in her voice nearly broke his heart. How had she lived 25 years without someone cherishing her talent, nurturing her dreams? How had the world been so blind to this incredible woman that she was amazed by simple acts of love and support? "Get used to it," Elijah murmured against her lips. "I plan to spend the rest of my life finding new ways to make you happy." They spent the morning in her new studio, Janice testing out the supplies while Elijah watched in fascination as she began a new painting, a landscape of their view over Lake Michigan, but rendered in colors that seemed to capture emotions rather than just scenery. "You see things differently than other people," he observed, studying the bold strokes of purple and gold she was using to paint what should have been blue water. "I paint what I feel, not what I see," she explained, not looking up from her canvas. "Right now, looking at that lake, I feel joy, contentment, hope. Those are golden feelings, purple feelings." Elijah felt his chest tighten with overwhelming love. Everything about her was unique, special, extraordinary. She didn't just see the world. She felt it, experienced it with an intensity that took his breath away. "Paint me sometime. I want to see myself through your eyes." "I already have," she admitted shyly, gesturing toward a canvas she'd turned to face the wall. "But it's probably terrible." He moved to look, and his breath caught in his throat. The painting showed him not as the polished businessman the world knew, but as she saw him, laughing, relaxed, his eyes soft with love. She had captured something in his expression that he'd never seen in photographs or mirrors, pure, unguarded happiness. "This is how you see me?" he asked in wonder. "This is who you really are," she replied, "the man you are when all the walls come down." Later that afternoon, they took a long walk through Lincoln Park, holding hands like teenagers, stopping to feed ducks at the pond where he'd proposed. The autumn air was crisp and clean, leaves crunching under their feet as they strolled through their favorite places. Janice wore the diamond tennis bracelet he'd given her, which had become her most treasured possession, and a simple sundress that made her look like spring personified. They talked about everything and nothing, her childhood dreams of becoming a famous artist, his secret love of romantic poetry, their plans for redecorating the guest bedrooms, their hopes for the children they would someday have. Every conversation with Janice felt like a revelation, peeling back another layer of her beautiful soul. "I have something else for you," Elijah said, as they settled on a bench overlooking the zoo, where they'd shared their first real conversation about dreams and hopes. "Elijah, the studio was already too much." "This isn't something I bought," he interrupted, pulling out a thick envelope. "This is something I did." Inside were official documents establishing the Janice Williams Foundation for Arts Education, a non-profit organization funded with $2 million from Elijah's personal trust, designed to provide art supplies and instruction to underprivileged children throughout Chicago. "You're always talking about how art saved you when you were a kid, how having a teacher who believed in your talent changed your life," he explained as she stared at the papers in shock. "Now you can be that teacher for hundreds of other children." Janice couldn't speak. She simply buried her face in his chest and wept, great heaving sobs that came from the deepest part of her soul. No one in her 25 years had ever understood her so completely, had ever cared enough to turn her passion into something that could change the world. This gift meant more to her than all the jewelry and expensive presents in the world. He had taken her deepest passion, her most cherished dream, and made it real. He had given her the power to make a difference, to be the mentor she had always wished she'd had. "I love you," she whispered against his shirt. "I love you so much, I don't have words for it." "Then show me," he whispered back. That evening they made love with a tenderness that bordered on worship. Every touch was a prayer, every kiss a promise, every shared breath a vow that went deeper than any words they would speak at their wedding. Elijah traced the curves of her body like a blind man learning to read, memorizing every freckle, every scar, every perfect imperfection that made her uniquely his. In the soft glow of candlelight, with rose petals scattered across their bed and soft music playing in the background, they moved together as if they were dancing to a rhythm only they could hear. This wasn't just physical passion, it was souls recognizing each other, hearts beating in perfect synchronization, two people becoming one in every way that mattered. "I want to have your children," Janice whispered as they lay entwined afterward, her head on his chest, his fingers playing with her hair. "How many?" he asked, his voice husky with emotion. "As many as you'll give me," she replied. "I want to fill this house with the sound of little feet running up and down these stairs. I want to teach them to paint, and you can teach them about buildings and dreams." 3, Elijah decided. 2 boys and a girl. The boys will have your artistic soul, and the girl will have your strength. What if it's the other way around? "Then we'll love them exactly as they are," he said, kissing the top of her head. "Just like I love you, completely, unconditionally, forever." They talked deep into the night about their future children, planning bedtime stories and family traditions, choosing names and imagining personalities. They would raise their children to be kind, creative, and confident. They would travel the world together, showing them different cultures and ways of life. They would create a home filled with love, laughter, and endless support for whatever dreams their children chose to pursue. Neither of them noticed the telephoto lens capturing their intimate moments from the abandoned building across the street, or realized that their most private conversations were being recorded by devices hidden throughout their home. "Promise me something," Janice said as dawn began to lighten the sky. "Anything. Promise me that no matter what happens, no matter what anyone says or does to try to tear us apart, you'll remember this feeling. Remember how much we love each other right now, in this moment." Elijah lifted her chin, looking deep into her eyes with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Janice Williams, I promise you that nothing and no one will ever come between us. You are my heart, my soul, my everything. I would rather die than lose you." It was a beautiful promise, spoken with complete sincerity and absolute faith. What neither of them knew was that Julia Oliver had spent the past month perfecting a plan that would test that promise to its very limits. A plan that involved falsified financial records, hired actors, and a web of lies so convincing that even the strongest love might not survive its poison. But for now, wrapped in each other's arms as the sun rose over Lake Michigan, Elijah and Janice existed in their perfect bubble of happiness, counting down the days until their spring wedding and dreaming of a future that seemed as certain as the sunrise itself. The symphony of their love played on, beautiful and pure, unaware that discordant notes were already being written into the score, notes that would soon threaten to turn their melody into a funeral dirge. Chapter 5. Cracks in Paradise. The devil doesn't come dressed in red with horns and a pitchfork. She comes disguised as everything you've ever trusted, speaking in the voice of family, wearing the mask of concern. The first crack in their paradise appeared on a Tuesday morning in November, delivered by a courier in an expensive suit who insisted on placing the manila envelope directly into Elijah's hands. He signed for it absent-mindedly, his attention focused on Janice as she hummed while preparing their breakfast, her movements graceful and unconsciously sensual in their kitchen. "Business documents," he murmured, about to set the envelope aside when something made him pause. The return address was unfamiliar, a law firm he'd never heard of, with offices downtown. Inside were bank statements that made his blood run cold. According to the documents, substantial sums had been transferred from his personal accounts to various offshore holdings, transfers he had never authorized, bearing electronic signatures that looked remarkably like his own. The amounts were staggering. 50,000 here, 75,000 there, adding up to nearly $500,000 over the past 6 months. "Janice," he called, his voice strained. "Have you seen anything unusual in our bank statements lately?" She looked up from the stove, concern creasing her beautiful features. "What do you mean, unusual?" "I don't really look at the accounts. You handle all the finances." Something cold settled in Elijah's stomach. The timing was too convenient, the amounts too precise. Someone was trying to frame either him or someone close to him for embezzlement, but who would have access to forge his signatures so expertly? His phone rang, displaying his mother's number. Against his better judgment, he answered. "Elijah, darling, we need to talk." Julia's voice was honey-sweet with an undertone of steel. "I'm at the club having lunch with some friends, and there are rumors circulating that I think you should know about." "What kind of rumors?" "Financial irregularities, dear. Nothing serious, I'm sure, but perhaps we should meet to discuss it privately. The family's reputation, you understand." Elijah felt the walls of his perfect world beginning to shift. "Mother, if you have something to say, not over the phone, darling. Meet me at the club in an hour. And Elijah, come alone." The Oliver family's private club occupied the top 3 floors of a downtown skyscraper, its mahogany-paneled rooms and crystal chandeliers reeking of old money and older secrets. Julia waited for him in the library, surrounded by leather-bound volumes and the ghosts of 100 business deals that had shaped Chicago's skyline. "You look tired, dear," she observed, gesturing for him to sit across from her. "Is everything well at home?" "Cut the concerned mother act," Elijah said wearily. "What do you want?" Julia's smile was razor-sharp as she slid a folder across the polished table. "I want to show you what your precious fiancé has been doing with your money." The documents inside were devastating. Bank records showing transfers to accounts linked to Janice's family members. Photographs of her meeting with men in expensive suits outside banks. Credit reports showing sudden improvements in her relatives' financial situations. Phone records indicating calls to offshore investment firms. "This is impossible," Elijah breathed, staring at the evidence. "Janice would never—" "Wouldn't she?" Julia's voice was silk over steel. "Think about it, darling. A poor girl from the wrong side of town suddenly has access to millions. Her family's debts mysteriously disappear. Her cousin in Alabama suddenly can afford a new house. Her aunt in California starts driving a luxury car." Elijah's hands shook as he studied the photographs. The woman in them looked like Janice, same height, same build, same hair color, but the images were taken from too far away to see her face clearly. "These could be anyone," he said, but doubt was already creeping into his voice like poison. Could they? Julia leaned forward, her eyes glittering with triumph. Then explain the bank statements, dear. Explain the transfers. Explain why she was so eager to have her name on your house, your accounts, your entire financial life. She didn't ask for any of that. I insisted, because she's clever, Julia interrupted smoothly. Much cleverer than we gave her credit for. She knew exactly how to play you, how to make you feel like the generous one while she systematically drained your resources. Rachel chose that moment to enter the library, her timing suspiciously perfect. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who had just witnessed a victory. "Oh, good. You're here," she said to Elijah, though her eyes remained on their mother. "I was hoping to catch you before the rumors spread further." "What rumors?" Elijah asked, though he was beginning to suspect this was all carefully orchestrated. "About the missing money from the charity foundation," Rachel said with false concern. "The Children's Hope Foundation, the one where you met your fiancé. There's been an audit, and they've discovered significant discrepancies in the accounts." The room seemed to spin around Elijah. The Children's Hope Foundation was where Janice worked most of her events, where she had access to wealthy donors and financial information. The implications were staggering. "That's impossible," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it?" Thomas appeared in the doorway, completing the family tribunal. "The audit shows that someone with inside knowledge has been skimming donations, redirecting funds to private accounts. Someone who knew which donors were most generous, which events raised the most money." "And who had that knowledge?" Julia asked softly, her question rhetorical and devastating. Elijah felt like he was drowning. Every piece of evidence was circumstantial, but together they painted a picture of systematic manipulation and theft. The woman he loved, the woman who had transformed his world with her warmth and honesty, was being portrayed as a calculating criminal. "I don't believe it," he said, but even he could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "Then ask her," Julia suggested smoothly. "Go home and ask your precious Janice to explain these transactions. Ask her about her family's sudden good fortune. Ask her why charity money started disappearing right after she gained access to your accounts." Elijah left the club feeling like a man walking to his own execution. The drive home took forever and no time at all, his mind racing between love and doubt, trust and suspicion. The evidence was overwhelming, but his heart refused to accept what his eyes had seen. He found Janice in her art studio, working on a painting of their future children, 3 small figures playing in a garden that looked remarkably like their backyard. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't hear him enter, and for a moment he simply watched her, trying to reconcile the woman he loved with the criminal his family was painting her to be. "Janice," he said quietly. She turned with a brilliant smile that faded when she saw his expression. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. We need to talk." Something in his tone made her set down her brush, wariness creeping into her eyes. "Okay. What about—" "Money," Elijah said, the word falling between them like a stone. "Missing money." The color drained from Janice's face, and for the first time since he'd known her, she looked guilty. "What money?" "Don't lie to me," he said, his voice sharper than he'd intended. "There are bank records, Janice, transfers from my accounts to accounts linked to your family, money missing from the charity where you work." "Elijah, I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice was shaking. "I've never touched your money. I've never even looked at your bank statements." "Then explain this," he said, pulling out copies of the documents Julia had shown him. Janice stared at the papers as if they were written in a foreign language. I don't understand. These accounts, these transactions, I've never seen them before in my life." "But this is your signature," Elijah pressed, pointing to authorizations that bore her name. "That's not my signature," she said desperately. "Elijah, you know my handwriting. Look at this. It's nothing like how I actually write." She was right. Now that he looked more carefully, the signatures were close but not perfect. But the doubt Julia had planted was growing like a cancer, poisoning everything he thought he knew about the woman he loved. "Maybe you should call your family," he suggested coldly. "Ask them about their recent financial windfalls." Janice's eyes filled with tears. "You don't trust me." "I'm trying to," Elijah replied, his own heart breaking even as he spoke. "But the evidence can be faked," she whispered. "Elijah, please. You know me. You know I would never steal from children, never steal from you. I love you." He wanted to believe her. Every fiber of his being screamed that this was wrong, that Janice was incapable of such calculated deception. But Julia's words echoed in his mind. "She's clever, much cleverer than we gave her credit for." "I need some time to think," he said finally, unable to meet her eyes. "Time?" Janice's voice cracked. "Elijah, this is our life we're talking about, our love, our future. You can't just take time." But he was already walking away, leaving her standing in the studio surrounded by paintings of the happy future they had planned together, a future that suddenly seemed as fictional as the forged documents in his hands. What Elijah didn't know was that Julia's surveillance team had captured every moment of their confrontation, every tear that fell from Janice's eyes, every crack that appeared in their perfect love story. The first phase of Julia's plan was complete, and the woman who had dared to steal her son's heart was finally beginning to understand that she had entered a war she was destined to lose. Chapter 6. The Slow Poison. Doubt is the cruelest weapon in love's arsenal. It needs no evidence to wound, no proof to kill, only the whispered suggestion that everything you believed was a beautiful lie. The silence in their home became a living entity, heavy and suffocating, filling every room with unspoken accusations and wounded love. 3 weeks had passed since Elijah's confrontation with Janice about the financial evidence, and their once perfect sanctuary had transformed into a battlefield where every gesture was scrutinized, every word weighed for hidden meaning. Elijah found himself watching Janice with the cold calculation of a prosecutor, analyzing her every movement for signs of deception. When she reached for her phone, he wondered who she was calling. When she checked their mail, he questioned what she might be hiding. When she spent money, even $20 at the grocery store, he found himself calculating whether it was reasonable or suspicious. "You bought organic vegetables again," he said one evening, his tone accusatory as he examined their shopping receipt. Janice looked up from where she was preparing dinner, hurt flashing across her features. "I always buy organic vegetables, Elijah. You know I believe in eating healthy." "Organic costs more," he replied, as if this was evidence of some greater crime. "Maybe we should be more careful about expenses." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. This was a man who had once surprised her with a $2 million foundation, now questioning a $15 grocery bill. But Julia's poison was working exactly as designed, turning love into suspicion, trust into paranoia. Janice set down her knife and turned to face him fully. "What's happening to us, Elijah? This isn't who we are." "Isn't it?" he asked, his voice cold as winter. "Maybe this is exactly who we are. Maybe I just never saw it before." The pain in her eyes was so raw that for a moment his resolve nearly cracked. This was the woman who had transformed his world, who had shown him what unconditional love felt like. But then Julia's words echoed in his mind. "She's an actress, darling. A very good one." Meanwhile, Julia's campaign intensified with surgical precision. She had hired the best psychological manipulation experts money could buy, and they were systematically destroying Elijah's faith in his own judgment. Every few days, new evidence would surface. A photograph of Janice supposedly meeting with a suspicious man outside a bank, though the woman in the photo could have been anyone with dark hair. Phone records showing calls to numbers that supposedly belonged to offshore investment firms, though Janice insisted she had never made such calls. Financial statements showing money moving in and out of accounts she swore she had never opened. "It's identity theft," Janice pleaded during one of their increasingly frequent arguments. "Someone is using my information to open accounts, to make transactions. Can't you see that?" "Identity theft is convenient," Elijah replied, his voice devoid of the warmth that had once made her feel cherished. "Very convenient timing, too." Rachel and Thomas played their parts perfectly, appearing at the house with concerned expressions and fresh revelations. They spoke in hushed tones about family obligations and protecting the Oliver name, always making sure Janice could overhear just enough to understand she was being discussed. "We're not saying she's guilty," Rachel would whisper to Elijah, her voice carrying just far enough. "We're just saying the evidence is concerning. The board is asking questions," Thomas would add quietly, "about your judgment, about the company's future. They're wondering if someone who can be so easily manipulated in his personal life can be trusted with business decisions." Each poisonous seed took root in Elijah's mind, growing into thorns that choked out his capacity for trust. He began checking their joint bank accounts obsessively, scrutinizing every transaction. When Janice bought art supplies, he questioned whether she needed them. When she donated to charity, he wondered if the money was really going where she claimed. The worst part was how Janice tried to hold their relationship together even as it crumbled around them. She continued cooking his favorite meals, though he now ate them in suspicious silence. She still reached for him in bed, though his responses had become mechanical, distant. She kept saying, "I love you," though he had stopped saying it back. "Talk to me," she begged one night as they lay in bed, the space between them feeling like an ocean. "Please, Elijah, whatever you're thinking, whatever you believe, just talk to me." "What's there to talk about?" he replied, staring at the ceiling. "Either you're innocent and someone is trying to frame you, or you're guilty and everything between us has been a lie. And which do you believe?" The silence stretched between them like a blade. Julia's masterpiece was the fabricated romantic evidence. Professional actors were hired to pose as Janice's secret lovers, photographed from strategic angles that suggested intimacy without requiring actual contact. Anonymous tips led Elijah to discover these photos in carefully orchestrated ways, tucked into his car visor, slipped under his office door, sent to his personal email from untraceable accounts. The photos showed Janice supposedly embracing other men, sharing intimate dinners, even entering hotel rooms. The images were expertly doctored, combining Janice's face with another woman's body, creating seemingly damning evidence of infidelity. "I was never at that restaurant," Janice insisted, staring at a photo that showed her supposedly holding hands with a stranger. "I've never seen that man before in my life." "The timestamp says last Tuesday," Elijah said coldly. "You told me you were working late." "I was working late. Call my office, check the security cameras, ask my assistant." "Assistants can be bought," he interrupted. "Security footage can be edited." Janice stared at him as if he were a stranger. "You really believe I would cheat on you? After everything we've shared, everything we've built together?" "I don't know what to believe anymore," Elijah admitted, his voice breaking slightly. "The woman I fell in love with would never steal from children or lie about finances, but maybe I never really knew that woman at all." The psychological warfare was relentless. Julia's team planted evidence of Janice supposedly researching how to access trust funds, how to manipulate wealthy men, how to hide financial assets. They created fake social media accounts showing her bragging about landing a rich husband and discussing strategies for bleeding him dry. "Look at this," Thomas said, showing Elijah a laptop screen during one of his concerned brother visits. "Someone sent this to the family lawyer. Apparently it's from your fiancé's social media." The posts were devastating, showing Janice discussing her relationship with Elijah in crude, calculating terms. The language was nothing like how she actually spoke, but doubt had already eroded Elijah's ability to think clearly. "She doesn't even use that social media platform," Elijah said weakly. "People have multiple accounts," Thomas replied smoothly, "especially when they're hiding things." As winter deepened, so did the chasm between them. Elijah began working late deliberately, avoiding home and the painful reality of what his relationship had become. When he did return, he found Janice painting frantically, as if she could somehow brush away the pain that was consuming their love. Her latest painting was heartbreaking, a portrait of them dancing on their rooftop, but the colors were muted, grey, as if the memory itself was fading. When she saw him looking at it, tears filled her eyes. "I'm losing you," she whispered. "I can feel you slipping away, and I don't know how to stop it." "Maybe it was always going to end this way," Elijah replied, his heart breaking even as he spoke the words. "Maybe we were just fooling ourselves." "No," Janice said fiercely. "We were never fooling ourselves. What we have is real, Elijah. This doubt, this suspicion, this isn't you, this isn't us." But her words fell on ears poisoned by months of careful manipulation. Julia's plan was working perfectly, turning the most trusting love story in Chicago into a tragedy of epic proportions. The final blow came when Elijah discovered that Janice had been secretly meeting with a lawyer. The meetings were innocent. She was trying to hire legal help to prove her innocence, to trace the source of the fraudulent accounts. But to Elijah's poisoned mind, it looked like she was preparing for divorce, planning to take half of everything before he could discover the full extent of her deception. "Getting your ducks in a row?" he asked coldly when she returned from one such meeting. "I was trying to clear my name," she replied wearily. "I was trying to save us." "By hiring a lawyer? By proving someone is framing me?" she exploded, her composure finally cracking. "By showing you that every piece of evidence is fabricated, every accusation is a lie? Or by making sure you get your fair share when this all falls apart?" Elijah shot back. The words hung in the air like poison gas, killing what remained of their trust. Janice stared at him as if she had never seen him before, and perhaps she hadn't. This cold, suspicious stranger bore little resemblance to the man who had once promised to love her unconditionally. "I don't know who you are anymore," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Good," Elijah replied, his heart dying even as he spoke, "because I don't know who you are either." What neither of them realized was that Julia's surveillance team was recording every moment of their destruction, documenting the systematic poisoning of the most beautiful love story Chicago had ever seen. Soon, Julia would play her final card, and the Christmas confrontation that would shatter their world completely was only days away. Chapter 7. Hearts Turning Cold. The cruelest deaths are not of the body, but of the soul, when love dies slowly, one cold word at a time, one withheld caress at a time, until two people who once burned for each other become beautiful strangers sharing the same grave. December arrived like a funeral shroud over their once happy home, bringing with it the kind of bone-deep cold that no amount of heating could chase away. The mansion that had once echoed with laughter and intimate conversations now felt like a mausoleum, its elegant rooms filled with the ghosts of happier days. Elijah had moved into the guest bedroom 2 weeks earlier, claiming he needed space to think. But Janice knew the truth. He could no longer bear to lie beside her, could no longer pretend that her touch didn't make his skin crawl with suspicion. The man who had once made love to her like she was his religion now looked at her as if she were a stranger who had invaded his sacred space. Their morning routine, once a symphony of shared coffee and stolen kisses, had become a cold ballet of avoidance. Elijah would rise early, shower in the guest bathroom, and dress in his walk-in closet before emerging fully armored in his business suit. He would eat breakfast while reading financial reports on his tablet, his eyes never meeting hers, his responses to her attempts at conversation reduced to monosyllabic grunts. "Good morning," Janice would say, her voice carrying the desperate brightness of someone trying to resurrect the dead. "Morning," he would reply without looking up, the word falling between them like a stone dropped into still water. She had stopped trying to touch him. The last time she had reached for his hand, he had pulled away so sharply that she felt the rejection like a physical blow. The man who had once called her his beautiful queen now flinched at her proximity as if her love had become contagious poison. Their shared meals had become exercises in emotional torture. Janice would cook his favorite dishes, the beef Wellington he had raved about, the chocolate soufflé that had once made him moan with pleasure, and watch him eat them with mechanical efficiency as if they were fuel rather than love made edible. "Do you like it?" she would ask hopefully, watching him chew the food she had prepared with trembling hands. "It's fine," he would answer, not even looking at her, his tone suggesting that nothing would ever be more than fine again. The worst part was the family dinners. Julia had resumed her weekly Sunday gatherings, using them as weapons disguised as tradition. She would invite Elijah and Janice to the family estate, where the dining room became a courtroom and Janice found herself on trial for crimes she had never committed. "How lovely that you could join us, dear," Julia would say to Janice, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "I was just telling everyone about the charity audit. Such a shame about those missing donations." The conversations would flow around Janice like toxic rivers, carrying innuendo and accusation disguised as concern. Rachel would mention friends who had been deceived by fortune hunters, while Thomas would discuss news stories about elaborate financial scams. Every word was chosen for maximum psychological impact, designed to remind Elijah of his doubts and make Janice feel like a criminal in the dock. "I read about a case just like this," Rachel would say, cutting her prime rib with surgical precision. "A young woman who seduced a wealthy man, gained access to his accounts, and systematically drained his resources. The poor man never saw it coming because he was blinded by what he thought was love." Elijah would sit in silence during these character assassinations, his jaw clenched but his mouth closed. The man who had once defended Janice against the slightest criticism now watched his family destroy her reputation without saying a word. "Aren't you going to say something?" Janice asked him one evening as they drove home from a particularly brutal family dinner. "What would you like me to say?" he replied, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "That you don't believe what they're saying. That you know I would never hurt you or anyone else." "Do I know that?" he asked, his voice as cold as the winter air seeping through the car windows. Janice stared at his profile, the strong jaw she had once traced with her fingertips, the green eyes that had once looked at her with such tenderness, the mouth that had once whispered promises of forever. Now he looked like a beautiful statue, carved from marble and just as lifeless. Their physical relationship had died a slow, agonizing death. The passionate lovemaking that had once set their bedroom on fire had gradually faded to perfunctory kisses and mechanical embraces. Now, even those had stopped. Elijah no longer reached for her in the night, no longer pulled her close when she shivered in her sleep. The king-sized bed that had once felt cozy now seemed vast and empty, a frozen ocean separating two people who had once been unable to sleep without touching. Janice began suffering from insomnia, lying awake in the darkness listening to Elijah's breathing in the guest room down the hall. Sometimes she would get up and stand in his doorway, watching him sleep, memorizing the face she was slowly losing to Julia's poison. He looked peaceful in sleep, younger, more like the man she had fallen in love with. But even in dreams, he seemed to be pulling away from her. Her art became her only refuge, her paintings growing darker and more desperate with each passing day. She painted their empty bed, their silent breakfast table, his back as he walked away from her. The colors she chose were the hues of grief, deep purples and midnight blues, grays that spoke of love dying slowly. "You're painting again," Elijah observed one evening, finding her in her studio with paint-stained fingers and tears on her cheeks. "It's the only thing that doesn't hurt," she replied, without looking at him. He studied her latest work, a portrait of two figures sitting at opposite ends of a long table, their faces turned away from each other, shadows stretching between them like chasms. "Is that supposed to be us?" he asked. "It's what we've become," she answered, finally meeting his eyes. "Strangers who share a house but not a life." For a moment, something flickered in his gaze, a ghost of the love that had once burned so brightly between them. But then his walls slammed back into place, and he became the cold stranger again. "Maybe that's all we ever were," he said quietly. "Maybe I just imagined the rest." The social humiliation was almost worse than the private pain. Chicago's high society had fully embraced Julia's narrative, and Janice found herself ostracized from the world she had briefly been welcomed into. Invitations stopped coming, former friends crossed the street to avoid her, and she could feel eyes following her wherever she went, whispers trailing in her wake like smoke. "There goes the gold digger," she heard one woman whisper at the grocery store. "I heard she stole money from children's charities," another replied. "How could anyone be so heartless?" Janice wanted to scream that it was all lies, that she had never stolen anything from anyone, that she loved Elijah more than her own life. But dignity was all she had left. So she held her head high and pretended not to hear the character assassination happening around her. Her business began to suffer as clients cancelled events and donors pulled their support. The woman who had once been known for creating magical celebrations was now seen as a liability, someone whose presence might taint their reputations by association. "I'm sorry, Miss Williams," one client said apologetically over the phone. "We've decided to go with someone else for our gala. I'm sure you understand." She understood perfectly. She was being erased from Chicago society as methodically as she was being erased from Elijah's heart. The engagement ring on her finger felt heavier with each passing day, its diamonds catching the light like tears she refused to shed in public. She would catch herself twisting it nervously during conversations, this symbol of a promise that was crumbling to dust in her hands. "Why don't you take it off?" Rachel asked during one particularly vicious family dinner, her eyes fixed on the ring like a predator studying wounded prey. "Because I'm still engaged," Janice replied quietly, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "Are you?" Thomas smirked. "Engagements require trust, don't they? What happens when that trust is gone?" Elijah said nothing, but his silence was answer enough. The final blow came when Janice discovered that Elijah had hired private investigators to follow her. She spotted them outside her remaining clients' offices, photographing her meetings, documenting her every move. The man who had once trusted her completely now had her under surveillance like a common criminal. "You're having me watched," she confronted him that evening, her voice hollow with betrayal. "I'm protecting my interests," he replied coldly. "Your interests? Is that what I am now? An interest to be protected against? You're someone who has access to my accounts, my property, my business contacts," he said, as if reciting from a legal document. "I'd be negligent not to monitor potential threats." The word threats hit her like a physical blow. This was what she had become in his mind. Not a lover, not a partner, not even a human being with feelings. She was a threat to be neutralized, a problem to be solved. "I was never a threat to you," she whispered, her composure finally beginning to crack. "I was the woman who loved you more than breathing." "Were you?" he asked, his green eyes as empty as winter lakes. "Or were you just a very good actress playing a very long game?" Christmas was only days away, and Janice could feel something building in the air like electricity before a storm. Julia's campaign had reached its crescendo, and the final confrontation was approaching like an inevitable execution. She began to understand that this Christmas would be different from all the others they had planned together. This Christmas would be the end of everything. But she refused to go down without a fight. If her love was going to die, if their future was going to be destroyed, she would face it with the dignity that had always defined her. She would not give Julia Oliver the satisfaction of seeing her crumble completely. What she didn't know was that Julia's masterpiece was about to unfold, a Christmas party that would strip away the last vestiges of their love and leave them both bleeding in the wreckage of what had once been the most beautiful story Chicago had ever witnessed. Chapter 8. The Christmas Ultimatum. Some words are bullets that kill instantly, while others are poison that destroys slowly. But the most devastating words of all are the ones that murder hope while wearing the mask of family tradition. December 22nd dawned grey and bitter, with snow falling like tears from a leaden sky. 3 days before Christmas, and the Oliver mansion blazed with holiday lights that seemed to mock the darkness gathering in Janice's heart. She stood at their bedroom window, watching the city prepare for celebration while her world crumbled around her like a house built on shifting sand. For weeks, she had clung to the desperate hope that Christmas would somehow restore the magic between them. She had decorated their home with the same loving care she had shown the previous year, hanging garlands and arranging poinsettias, even wrapping gifts for a man who no longer looked at her with love. The presents sat under their tree like silent witnesses, a custom watch engraved with "Forever Yours," a first edition of his favorite architecture book, a painting she had created of the home they had planned to build together. But this morning, everything changed. Elijah emerged from the guest bathroom, already dressed in his charcoal suit, his movements efficient and cold. He avoided her eyes as he always did now, treating her like an unwelcome stranger who had invaded his personal space. "Good morning," Janice said softly, the words feeling like glass in her throat. He didn't respond immediately, instead checking his phone with the mechanical precision of a man going through motions. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence. "I won't be home for Christmas Eve," he said without looking at her. "The family is having their celebration at Mother's house." Janice felt the room tilt around her. "What do you mean you won't be home? We always spend Christmas Eve together. We have traditions." "Things change," Elijah interrupted, his tone as sharp as winter wind. "Family obligations take precedence." "I'm your family too," she whispered, her voice breaking despite her efforts to remain strong. "Or I'm supposed to be." Finally, he looked at her, and the emptiness in his green eyes was more devastating than any anger could have been. This was the gaze of a man looking at someone he no longer recognized, someone who had become a burden rather than a blessing. "Are you?" he asked quietly. "Because families are built on trust, Janice, and I don't trust you anymore." The words hit her like physical blows, each syllable carefully chosen to inflict maximum damage. She gripped the windowsill to keep from falling, her knuckles white against the dark wood. "Then why am I still here?" she asked, her dignity hanging by the thinnest of threads. "If you don't trust me, if you don't love me, why haven't you asked me to leave?" Something flickered across his face. Pain, perhaps, or regret. But it was gone so quickly, she might have imagined it. "I wasn't expecting you this year," he said finally, the cruelest words he had ever spoken to her. "My family will be with me. Perhaps you should make other arrangements." The statement hung in the air like a death sentence. After everything they had shared, every promise they had made, every dream they had built together, she was being dismissed like an unwanted guest. The man who had once begged her to marry him was now telling her she wasn't welcome at his family's Christmas celebration. "Other arrangements," she repeated numbly. You want me to spend Christmas alone? I want you to spend Christmas wherever you'll be most comfortable, he replied, but his tone suggested he didn't care where that might be. Janice stared at him, this beautiful stranger who wore her fiancé's face but spoke with a cold heart she didn't recognize. 6 months ago, he would have fought armies to keep her by his side. Now, he was casting her out like garbage. I see, she said quietly, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside her chest. And after Christmas? What then? Elijah straightened his tie, a gesture she had once found endearing, but now seemed like a shield against any remaining vulnerability. We'll discuss our situation after the holidays, he said formally, as if they were business partners dissolving a failed venture rather than lovers whose dreams lay in ashes. Our situation, she repeated, tasting the bitter words. Is that what we are now? A situation to be resolved. He didn't answer, which was answer enough. That evening, as snow continued to fall outside their windows, Janice watched Elijah prepare for the Oliver family's Christmas Eve celebration with the same care he might have taken preparing for a funeral. He chose his most expensive suit, the one she had always said made his eyes look like emeralds. He wore the cufflinks his father had given him, the ones that symbolized the Oliver legacy and power. She wanted to ask if he was trying to look good for someone else, if there was already another woman waiting in the wings to take her place. But she had lost the right to ask such questions. She had become a stranger in her own home, watching her life pack itself away like Christmas decorations being stored for another year. You look handsome, she said softly as he checked his appearance in the hallway mirror. He met her eyes in the reflection, and for just a moment, she saw a flicker of the man she had fallen in love with, vulnerable, uncertain, caught between what he felt and what he had been convinced to believe. Janice, he began, but then his phone buzzed with a text from Julia, and the moment shattered like crystal hitting stone. I should go, he said instead, the softness gone from his voice. Mother doesn't like to be kept waiting. As he reached for the door, Janice felt something desperate claw its way up her throat. Elijah, wait, she called out, her composure finally cracking. Please, before you go, just tell me one thing. Do you remember loving me? Do you remember how happy we were? He stopped with his hand on the doorknob, his shoulders tense beneath the expensive fabric of his suit. For a long moment, he didn't turn around, didn't speak, didn't breathe. I remember thinking I was happy, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. But I don't know anymore if any of it was real. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like the final note of a funeral dirge. The Oliver family mansion glittered like a malevolent jewel against the snowy landscape, its windows blazing with golden light and its halls echoing with the forced merriment of people celebrating a victory they had worked months to achieve. The guest list was Chicago's elite, old money families, business titans, political power brokers, all gathered to witness what Julia Oliver privately called the restoration of proper order. Elijah arrived to find the party in full swing, crystal champagne flutes catching the light from massive chandeliers, while servers in white uniforms circulated through rooms decorated with enough holly and gold ribbon to stock a department store. Everything was perfect, elegant, expensive, exactly the kind of Christmas celebration his family had always hosted. Darling, Julia appeared at his side, resplendent in burgundy silk and diamonds that caught the light like captured stars. You look wonderful. I was so worried you might bring complications. She's not coming, Elijah said flatly, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing server. Oh! Julia's eyebrows rose in perfectly orchestrated surprise. How unfortunate. I do hope she's not unwell. Rachel materialized beside them, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. Perhaps she decided to spend Christmas with her real family, the ones who've been benefiting so generously from their association with her. Rachel, Elijah warned, but his sister simply laughed. "Oh, brother dear, surely we can speak honestly now. The woman has been exposed for what she truly is. There's no need to pretend anymore." Thomas joined their circle, carrying himself with the satisfaction of someone who had won a long-fought battle. "I heard the charity audit was finalized today. Apparently, the missing money trail leads directly to accounts connected to her family members. Quite the Christmas gift for the prosecutors." Elijah felt something cold settle in his stomach. "What are you talking about?" "The embezzlement case," Julia said smoothly, her eyes glittering with triumph. "Did she not tell you? The authorities have enough evidence to file formal charges. I'm surprised she hasn't fled the city already." The champagne turned to acid in Elijah's mouth. Somewhere in his heart, beneath layers of doubt and poison, a small voice whispered that this was all wrong, that the timing was too convenient, the evidence too perfect. But he had been conditioned to distrust that voice, to question every instinct that led him toward believing in Janice's innocence. "Ladies and gentlemen," Julia announced, her voice carrying easily across the crowded room, "if I could have your attention for a moment." The party guests turned toward their hostess, their faces bright with curiosity and expensive wine. Elijah felt a chill of premonition, sensing that whatever his mother was about to say would change everything. "I want to thank you all for being here tonight," Julia continued, her smile radiant and deadly. "Christmas is a time for family, for celebrating the blessings of the year past and looking forward to an even brighter future." She paused, her eyes finding Elijah in the crowd. "This year has been particularly educational for our family. We've learned valuable lessons about trust, about loyalty, and about the importance of protecting what we hold dear." Murmurs rippled through the crowd as guests sensed drama approaching. "Some of you may have heard whispers about my son's recent entanglement with an unsuitable woman," Julia said, her voice carrying just the right note of maternal concern. "I'm pleased to announce that situation has been resolved. Elijah has seen through the deception and chosen to put family and honor above temporary infatuation." Applause broke out among the guests, the sound making Elijah's skin crawl. He felt like an animal in a cage, being displayed for the entertainment of people who had never cared about his happiness. "Mother," he began, but Julia raised her hand for silence. "In fact," she continued, her smile growing wider, "I'm delighted to share that Elijah will be announcing his engagement to Catherine Ashworth in the new year, a proper match between two established families." The room erupted in congratulations and cheers, but Elijah heard none of it. His mother had just announced his future without consulting him, had promised him to another woman like he was a prize to be awarded, the woman he had loved, still loved despite everything, was being erased from his life as completely as if she had never existed. As the party swirled around him, Elijah stood frozen in the center of his family's triumph, finally understanding that he had been playing a game where the rules had been written long before he was born. And somewhere across the city, in the home they had shared and the bed where they had once planned their future, Janice was spending Christmas Eve alone, not knowing that her final humiliation was yet to come. Chapter 9. Silent Thunder. The most powerful storms are often the quietest ones. They don't announce themselves with wind and rain, but with the terrible silence that comes just before the world splits apart. Christmas morning arrived with the cruel irony of perfect beauty, crystalline snow blanketing Chicago in pristine white, church bells ringing across the city, families gathering in warm homes filled with laughter and love. But in the mansion that Elijah and Janice had once called their sanctuary, only emptiness reigned. Janice had not slept. She sat in what had been their living room, still wearing the red silk dress she had put on for a Christmas Eve that never came, surrounded by presents that would never be opened and decorations that now seemed to mock her solitude. The tree they had decorated together stood like a monument to dead dreams, its lights blinking in rhythms that felt like a dying heartbeat. Her phone had rung 17 times throughout the night. Her mother calling from Alabama, her aunt from California, cousins and friends who wanted to wish her Merry Christmas and ask about wedding plans. She had let every call go to voicemail, unable to explain that the fairy tale they all believed in had become a nightmare written by people who wielded money like weapons. At exactly 10 o'clock, her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Turn on Channel 7 News. You need to see this. A friend." With trembling fingers, she reached for the remote. The morning news was covering Chicago's social events, and there, filling her television screen in high definition, was footage from the Oliver family Christmas party. The camera panned across elegant guests, focused on Julia's radiant smile, and then settled on Elijah, standing stiff and hollow-eyed as his mother announced his future. "Delighted to share that my son Elijah will be announcing his engagement to Catherine Ashworth in the new year." Julia's voice filled the empty room like poison gas. A proper match between two established families, after his unfortunate entanglement with someone completely unsuitable. The reporter's voice continued over shots of the glittering party. The announcement ends months of speculation about Oliver's relationship with event coordinator Janice Williams, who has been connected to several financial scandals involving Chicago charities. Janice watched her character assassination play out on live television, watched her reputation destroyed in front of the entire city. But what broke her heart completely was Elijah's face in the background, empty, defeated, looking like a man attending his own funeral. The doorbell rang at 11:30, its chimes echoing through the house like a death knell. Janice considered ignoring it, but something, perhaps masochistic curiosity, compelled her to answer. Julia Oliver stood on her doorstep, impeccably dressed in a winter white coat and carrying herself with the satisfaction of a general who had won a decisive battle. Behind her stood Rachel and Thomas, their faces bright with malicious triumph. "May we come in, dear?" Julia asked, though she was already stepping across the threshold uninvited. "We have some things to discuss." Janice stepped back, allowing the family that had destroyed her life to enter the home she had filled with love. They moved through her living room like conquerors surveying conquered territory, their eyes cataloguing everything as if already calculating its value. "Lovely decorations," Rachel observed with false sweetness. "Though I suppose this will be your last Christmas here." "What do you want?" Janice asked quietly, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her chest. Julia settled onto the sofa where Janice and Elijah had spent countless evenings planning their future, her smile as sharp as winter wind. "We want to show you something, dear. Evidence that we've been saving for just the right moment." Thomas opened a briefcase and spread photographs across the coffee table like tarot cards predicting doom. The images were devastating. Bank records, financial statements, transaction histories, all bearing Janice's forged signatures and linking her to the systematic theft of hundreds of thousands of dollars. "Impressive work, isn't it?" Julia said conversationally. "Some of the best forgeries money can buy. Of course, the authorities won't know they're forgeries. The paper trail is quite convincing." Janice stared at the fabricated evidence, finally understanding the true scope of Julia's campaign. This wasn't just about destroying her relationship with Elijah. This was about destroying her completely, financially and legally. "You created all of this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We created nothing," Rachel replied with mock innocence. "We simply discovered irregularities and felt duty-bound to report them to the proper authorities." "The FBI's Financial Crimes Division is very interested in your case," Thomas added helpfully, "particularly since the stolen money was supposed to go to children's charities. They take that sort of thing very seriously." Julia leaned forward, her eyes glittering with triumph. "But here's the beautiful part, dear. All of this evidence, all of these charges, they could simply disappear. Computer files get corrupted, paper records get misfiled, witnesses suddenly develop memory problems." "What do you want?" Janice asked again, though she already knew the answer. "Leave," Julia said simply. "Leave Chicago, leave Illinois, leave Elijah's life completely, disappear quietly, and we'll make sure the evidence disappears too. Fight us, and you'll spend the next decade in federal prison." The silence that followed was thick with unspoken threats and broken dreams. Janice looked around the home she had transformed with her love, at the Christmas tree that would never see the gifts beneath it opened, at the life she was being forced to abandon. "And if I leave?" she asked quietly. "You sign these documents." Julia produced a legal folder, relinquishing any claim to this house, to Elijah's assets, to the Oliver name. "You become a ghost, dear, a brief mistake that Elijah will eventually forget." Janice stared at the papers that would erase her from the only life she had ever wanted. Her hands trembled as she read clauses that would strip away her identity, her dignity, her very existence in Elijah's world. "You planned this from the beginning," she said, understanding finally dawning. "From the moment I met him, you were planning to destroy me." "We protect what's ours," Julia replied coldly. "Elijah is an Oliver. He was always meant for someone of his own class, someone who could strengthen the family rather than weaken it with sentiment." "He loves me," Janice whispered, clinging to the one truth she still believed. "Does he?" Rachel laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "Have you seen him lately, dear? Have you looked into his eyes? Love requires trust, and he doesn't trust you anymore. We made sure of that." The cruelty was breathtaking in its precision. They had systematically destroyed not just her relationship with Elijah, but his capacity to love her. They had poisoned his mind so thoroughly that even if the truth came out, the damage might be irreversible. "You have 24 hours to decide," Julia said, standing and smoothing her coat. "Sign the papers and disappear, or face the consequences of challenging a family with unlimited resources and no conscience." "Where is Elijah?" Janice asked, as the family prepared to leave. "Elijah is where he belongs," Thomas replied, "with his real family, planning his real future with a woman worthy of the Oliver name." After they left, Janice sat alone in the wreckage of her life, staring at the legal documents that would erase her existence. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the world in white that looked pure from a distance but was really just frozen water, beautiful and cold and temporary. She thought about fighting, about trying to prove her innocence, about clinging to hope that somehow the truth would set her free. But she had seen the evidence they had fabricated, understood the power they wielded, recognized the futility of battling an enemy with infinite resources and no moral constraints. More than that, she had seen what their poison had done to Elijah. The man she loved was gone, replaced by a stranger who looked at her with suspicion and spoke to her with contempt. Even if she could prove her innocence, could she ever trust him not to doubt her again? Could love survive in the ashes of such complete betrayal? At exactly midnight, as Christmas Day became December 26th, Janice Williams made her decision. But it wasn't the decision Julia Oliver expected, and it wouldn't unfold the way the powerful family had planned. She picked up her phone and made a call that would change everything. The storm was about to break, and when it did, the Oliver family would discover that they had underestimated their opponent in the most catastrophic way possible. Janice Williams might be losing the man she loved, but she wasn't going to lose her dignity, and she certainly wasn't going to lose without making them pay for what they had stolen from her. The silent thunder was about to become a roar that would shake Chicago to its foundations. Chapter 10. Love's Redemption. True power isn't in destroying your enemies, it's in watching them destroy themselves while you hold the one weapon they never saw coming, the truth. The phone call Janice made at midnight on Christmas night wasn't to a lawyer or the FBI, it wasn't to her family or friends, it was to her mortgage company. The bank that held the loan on the mansion that Julia Oliver had forgotten was owned jointly by two people, one of whom was about to remind the world that quiet strength could topple even the mightiest empires. "This is Janice Oliver," she said, using her legal name for the first time in months. "I need to speak with someone about cancelling automatic payments on my mortgage account." By dawn, the financial earthquake had begun. When Janice cancelled the mortgage payment on December 27th, she didn't just stop paying for one house, she triggered a cascade of financial obligations that the entire Oliver empire depended upon. The mortgage on the family mansion, the credit lines for Oliver real estate, the investment portfolios that use the property as collateral, everything was interconnected in a web of financial dependency that Julia had never imagined could be turned against her. Rachel Oliver discovered the crisis first when her Black American Express card was declined at Tiffany & Company. Thomas received the news while at his country club, where the manager quietly informed him that his membership had been suspended due to non-payment. But it was Julia who felt the full impact of Janice's quiet revenge. "Mrs. Oliver, this is Harrison Beck from First National Bank." The voice was professionally sympathetic, but financially ruthless. "I'm calling to inform you that your family's primary residence is now in foreclosure proceedings due to mortgage default. You have 30 days to either bring the account current or vacate the premises." Julia's crystal paperweight shattered against the marble fireplace as the full scope of her miscalculation became clear. In her arrogance, she had forgotten that Janice Williams was more than just a poor girl who could be bullied. She was a co-owner of the property that supported their entire financial structure. The call that changed everything came to Elijah at 6 p.m. on December 30th. Harrison Beck entered his office carrying foreclosure notices that would shatter what remained of Elijah's world. "The payment comes from the lakefront property you own jointly with Janice Williams," Beck explained. "She cancelled the automatic payment system on December 26th. As a co-owner, she had every legal right to do so." The words hit Elijah like a physical blow. "How much to resolve this?" "Approximately $12 million due immediately." Beck handed him a letter written in Janice's careful handwriting. "Elijah, by now you understand what I have done and why. Your family tried to erase me, to make me disappear like I never existed. They created lies, fabricated evidence, and poisoned your mind against me. I could take everything from you the way you took everything from me. I could let your family lose their home, their status, their power. But I won't, because that would make me like them, and I refuse to become the monster they painted me to be. You have 48 hours to decide what matters more, your family's version of the truth or the love we once shared. If you choose them, I will disappear forever, and your debts will disappear with me. If you choose to fight for the truth, meet me where you first told me you loved me. The woman who still loves you, Janice." That night, Elijah sat alone in his office, allowing himself to truly remember Janice. Not the criminal his family had painted, but the woman who had transformed his world with her warmth. He remembered her humming while she cooked, her passionate speeches about helping children, her hands trembling as she'd said yes to his proposal. At 3 a.m. on December 31st, Elijah Oliver made his decision. He began with the bank records, studying them with analytical precision. The transactions were too clean, too perfectly timed. The signatures that supposedly belonged to Janice were close but not exact. The J was wrong, the way she crossed her T's was different. The photographs that supposedly showed her with other men revealed subtle inconsistencies under magnification, shadows that fell wrong, lighting that didn't match, pixels that blurred in telltale patterns of digital manipulation. Every piece of evidence that had convinced him of Janice's guilt crumbled under scrutiny, revealing the elaborate fraud his family had constructed. The final proof came when he confronted Julia at 6 a.m. on New Year's Eve. "I know what you did," he said, walking into his mother's study without knocking. Julia looked up, her mask finally slipping. "You're just like your father. Too sentimental to understand that love is a luxury we can't afford." "That girl saved me," Elijah replied. "She made me a better man than you ever could, and you destroyed her for it." "She was nobody," Julia snapped. "A poor little event coordinator who should have been grateful for what she got." "She was the woman I loved," Elijah said quietly. "She was going to be my wife, the mother of my children, and you took that away from me with lies. If you choose her over your family, you'll lose everything." "Good," Elijah replied. "I never wanted any of it anyway." At 8 p.m. on New Year's Eve, as fireworks began to light up the Chicago skyline, Elijah Oliver stood on the rooftop of their lakefront mansion, the place where he had first told Janice he loved her. She was already there, wearing the simple black dress he had bought for her, her hair caught by the winter wind. She looked older, sadder, but still beautiful enough to take his breath away. "You came," she said softly. "I almost didn't," he admitted. "I was afraid you wouldn't be here. Afraid I was too late." "You're just in time," she replied, finally meeting his eyes. "I know the truth," Elijah said. "About the evidence, the photographs, the bank accounts. I know what my family did to you, what they made me believe. I know I failed you in every way possible." "You were poisoned against me," Janice said quietly. "I don't blame you for believing what they showed you." "I should have trusted my heart instead of my eyes," he replied, his voice breaking. "I should have known that the woman who loved me enough to put my name on everything she owned could never do what they accused you of." Janice turned to face him fully, tears streaming down her cheeks. "They destroyed us, Elijah. How do we trust again? How do we love without wondering if it's going to be taken away?" Elijah took her hands in his, feeling the familiar electricity that had never diminished despite months of pain. "We start over," he said simply. "We leave Chicago, leave the money, leave everything that connects us to the people who tried to destroy our love. We go somewhere new and build something that belongs only to us." "You would give up everything? Your inheritance, your family, your whole life?" "I already lost everything when I lost you," he replied fiercely. "You are my life, Janice. You always were." As midnight approached and fireworks exploded over Lake Michigan, Elijah Oliver dropped to one knee for the second time, pulling out the same grandmother's ring. "Janice Williams," he said, his voice carrying like a prayer, "I've been an idiot, a coward, and a fool. I let other people's poison turn me against the best thing that ever happened to me. I can't promise you wealth or status," he continued, tears streaming down his face, "but I can promise you my whole heart, my complete trust, and my absolute devotion for the rest of my life. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend forever making up for the time we lost?" "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Elijah Oliver. I'll marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger for the second time, and when he stood to kiss her, fireworks exploded overhead like the universe itself was celebrating their reunion. 6 months later, in a small coastal town in Northern California, a simple wedding took place in a garden overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The bride wore a dress she had sewn herself, the groom a suit he had bought off the rack. Elijah Oliver, now Elijah Williams at his own insistence, worked as an architect for affordable housing projects. Janice ran a small art therapy program for local children. They lived in a modest house with a view of the ocean, and every evening they would sit on their porch, holding hands and watching the sunset. "Do you ever miss it?" Janice asked one evening, her hand resting on her growing belly. "Miss what?" Elijah replied. "The money, the mansion, the life you gave up." Elijah looked at his wife and smiled with the contentment of a man who had learned the difference between wealth and richness. "I never had a life before you," he said simply. "Everything else was just existence. This is the only life I've ever wanted." As the sun set over the Pacific Ocean, Elijah and Janice Williams sat together in perfect peace, proof that love, real, tested and true, could survive anything the world tried to throw at it. This time, he would never let anyone come between them again.